European markets were rattled today by events that occurred on the tiny Mediterranean island nation of Cyprus. The island is part of the European Union, and plans for the government to seize individual bank deposits set off outrage there. It also prompted worries about whether other nations could follow suit in time.
The Eurogroup and the International Monetary Fund have agreed a €10 billion rescue package for Cyprus, which is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy.
How on earth did they think they were going to get away with it?
I can't answer you what the thinking behind it is, but I'm pretty sure that it's going to be something that they will regret for a long time to come.
The reality is that desperate times calls for desperate measures. No one likes to tax their bank depositors like what is being done in Cyprus, unless the alternative is that the Cypriot financial system collapses and takes the entire Cypriot economy with it.
Cyprus is nearly broke, and the social fabric is beginning to tear. Bank workers worried about their future blocked access to parliament. Lawmakers had to be lifted over the barricades.
The banks are closed right now. So if you want to avoid this, you couldn't take your money out today in any case. So it's either get the tax or get the collapse.
These are the people who are really suffering. They saved their money, they put it in the bank, and they believed that it would be safe. Then they woke up to find that their balances had gone down considerably, and they couldn't even get access to cash.
What happened?
There's no money, and I couldn't get any money out, and then my card won't come out.
No accounts, no cards, no nothing.
So what will they do?
God knows. Suicide.
Everybody should take this lesson from it. Your money is not safe in the banks. Don't keep more than what you need just from a day-to-day standpoint in the banks, because I don't care whether you're in England or in Europe or in the United States. If the banks get in trouble, they will take your money, the government will take your money, and so don't let them do it. Use cash to the extent you can. Don't use the banks. The banks are really your economic enemy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Press for Truth TV. I'm your host, Dan Dix, and today we're going to be talking about the ongoing banking crisis that has emerged in Cyprus and is now being heard all around the world, and also about how there is some very interesting wording in the Canadian 2013 budget that seems to imply that there may be similar plans for Canadians should a similar situation arise here in Canada. And joining us on the line today to talk about all this is Chris Horlacher. Chris is on the board of directors for the Mises Institute, so he's very well versed, very knowledgeable in the Austrian School of Economics line of thinking. Chris is also a bullion dealer. So Chris, thank you very much, man, for taking some time to speak with us here today at Press for Truth TV.
Thanks for having me on, Dan.
All right, man. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, what some of these things may mean for Canadians should this arise here in Canada and spread farther than Europe. But before we even get into that, let's just talk a little bit about what's actually taking place in Cyprus. I'm very curious to hear your point of view, especially from the point of view of an anarcho-capitalist such as yourself. What do you think is going on here? How is it that we've gotten to the point where the banks in Cyprus can just take money out of the accounts of the depositors there, and how is it that we've gotten to this point?
Well, to begin, I think it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding that certain people have in terms of the relationship between themselves and the bank when they open up a deposit account, because I guess common sense would dictate that you deposit money into the bank, and the bank is holding on to that for you, and you can retrieve it at any time. Sort of like a custodian or a trust arrangement. But that's not what actually happens. You're actually loaning the money to the bank when you open up a deposit account, and you've become what is technically termed an unsecured creditor, which means in a bankruptcy, you typically go to the very end of the line. So what is happening in the Cyprus measures is they're basically going through bankruptcy, and the unsecured creditors are usually the last ones dancing, and the music stops, and they find out they don't have a chair to sit down on. So this is essentially what's happening. Now, when banks default this way, what's happening in Cyprus is something we haven't seen yet through this whole economic crisis that started in 2008. Because when banks needed capital, the central bank would step in and inject the money that the banks needed to continue to operate. But in Cyprus, they've taken a slightly different route, and I would argue a more honest route, because now the people who have invested in the bank will actually see the consequences and feel the consequences of the actions of that bank. So rather than resorting to inflation and printing up a bunch of money and then pumping it back into the banks to recapitalize them, the banks are now converting their liabilities into equity. So if you're a depositor in the bank, in one of the Bank of Cyprus or Lakey Bank, which are the two biggest banks in Cyprus now, and probably the stars of the show going on over there, you've essentially had your account seized and the money taken out, and what you'll get in return will be eventually shares of the bank, which you probably don't even want. The banks ran themselves into bankruptcy, so I don't think most of these newly minted shareholders are really going to want to be holding equity in these institutions anymore.
Well, there's no doubt that more and more people are losing faith in this whole system of fractional reserve lending, and they're starting to realize that the money just simply is not safe in the banks. But in regards to a free market, I mean, is it? Do you think that if we truly had a free market, for example, that these banks should have just failed a long time ago, and any banks that don't, overborrow or have the proper reserves to back what they're actually lending out would actually thrive and survive and do well? Should the market just let itself kind of resolve itself rather than the government stepping in to bail out these failed banks?
Well, of course. And if we had a free market, these last 100 years in the financial sector, things would look very different, and we wouldn't have had the kinds of booms and busts that we did over the last century. So considering this one in particular, governments around the world, particularly in Europe, England, Australia, the United States, and even here in Canada, they all embarked on this policy of improving home ownership. And they engaged a number of mechanisms in order to stimulate the financial sector into directing capital into these kinds of investments. And as Austrian business cycle would dictate, this generated a series of malinvestments, and then now we're in the process of liquidation, because now we've become overinvested in the housing sector, and people have leveraged up too much in order to acquire more properties. And now that the interest rates are finally starting to go up, none of these projects look profitable anymore, and everybody is beginning to scramble for the exits. And it's pulling down the entire financial edifice that was built up around this industry now.
Well, speaking of scrambling for the exit, are you familiar with all the information that's come out in regards to, for example, the president of Cyprus having foreknowledge and informing his own family, who were able to move, I believe it was upwards of 21 million euros into safer banks? I believe there was just a list recently published that showed, I think it was around 138 institutions and individuals who appear to have prior knowledge and got out before all this came about. Is that a sign that, I mean, the government is clearly not looking out for the best interests of its people, and they're taking care of their own in these situations?
Oh, absolutely. And in any time we see a systemic collapse, this is exactly what happens. The insiders and the elites at the top will always grab for all the resources they can get their hands on and run for the doors first, and leave everybody else left holding an empty bag.
Now, here in Canada, there seems to be this, it's perceived that, things are okay here. The majority of Canadians are probably of the opinion that we don't have these similar issues here, so it's not really in the minds of the masses of the Canadians just yet. But according to some of the very interesting wording in the 2013 budget talking about so-called bail-ins, Do you think that we could potentially see similar situations here in the West that may even potentially lead to bank runs?
Well, that is definitely in the cards as far as I can see. We've become extremely leveraged as a country here. We're not looking any different than any other major Western nation that's currently suffering from severe fiscal problems. We've been able to hold on for a longer period of time, mainly because we started from a position of greater fiscal soundness. Our debt to GDP ratio was much lower and still is lower than most Western countries. But as we've seen before in the past, that can change in the blink of an eye. And the centerpiece of our housing industry is the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and they're currently leveraged to a degree equal or greater than that of Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And beyond that, as a country as a whole, in terms of everyone's debt-to-income ratio is now higher than it was in the United States when their collapse started. So, and interest rates here are still at rock bottom. They're as low as they've ever been. So when interest rates are this low, it's kind of hard to make them go lower. The only way is up. And when interest rates start to rise, that is going to destroy asset valuations in the banks, which is going to cause them to scramble for money, either from the Bank of Canada or from this new bail-in measure, which is why I think they haven't enacted it, but they're considering it now. And the banking system in Canada historically in the 19th century was one of the best in the world, and we still kind of cling to that sort of vision of our system here. And the government has certainly not done anything to wake anybody up to the reality of our situation. And beyond that, we have all the same other moral hazards here. We have things like the CDIC, which is covering deposits up to $100,000 ostensibly. That's what we're led to believe. But when you look into the financial statements of the CDIC, you'll see that they only have $2.5 billion in assets to cover over $650 billion of deposits. So they don't even have 1/2 of 1% of all insurable deposits in Canada covered by their assets. And there's over 2.2 trillion in total deposits in Canada. So how they can say with a straight face that they're ready to cover what goes on if one of these Schedule I banks fails is absolutely ludicrous. And the investment portfolio of the CDIC is just more government debt. There's nothing there. So any claims that the CDIC pays out is going to still come right out of the taxpayer because it's funded by government debts.
Right. It's just a simple matter of looking at the numbers, and it's not hard to see that this is only going to get worse. And I think that people are concerned about this. And for people who have, let's say, over $100,000 of their savings in their accounts, I think perhaps what the questions are going to be for Canadians, of people who want to maybe protect themselves, is how do they do that? How do they go about doing that? And what, in your opinion, are some of the things that people should be looking to do? I wonder, should people look to diversify and maybe spread out their money through a large number of smaller banks? Or should people just get away from the banks altogether and perhaps invest in something tangible, something like real estate or art or precious metals, gold or silver? For the people who are looking for current solutions right now that they can do to protect themselves and their family, what do you think are some of the moves people ought to think about?
Well, those are all great ideas, and I definitely agree that people need to start looking for alternative forms of investments, particularly things that are there to help preserve your wealth. But people still need their paycheck to go into an account somewhere. And so to that situation, I would suggest stop dealing with Schedule I banks. And these are there's about 20 of them. These are the federally chartered domestic Canadian banks, but these are the big five. So if you do want to keep your accounts there, definitely keep under $100,000 in any one institution. But also, you'll probably also want to start looking at what these banks are invested in. And if you agree with those investments, fine. If you don't, then maybe you should be looking for another bank. But you can also go down the tiers, and I would recommend maybe closing your account at one of the chartered banks and maybe joining a credit union. That's a good alternative. But definitely, people need to be moving their assets outside of the financial system as it currently exists, and they need to find things like real estate, land, art, precious metals, as you suggested. Yeah.
This just came to my mind as you were talking that, what are your thoughts on the Bitcoin revolution that's taking place right now? I think the last time I saw it was at $141 or something like that. This is beyond a parabolical move. This is unbelievable. What's your take on that? Do you think that is safe or trustworthy?
Well, I'm very interested in Bitcoin. I am a bit of a techie guy, and I like the whole peer-to-peer protocol. It's a very ingenious idea, and I think it lends itself well to the anarcho-capitalist movement and agorism, and these are things that people can research for themselves. But I am concerned now because there was a report that came out a couple weeks ago. And now I think it was the Financial Action Task Force or some agency now is starting to take a serious look at Bitcoin. We probably over the years they'll probably start trying to regulate or control the exchanges. And if they can't outright control it, then they may just start seizing the domains of the Bitcoin exchanges. So it's a great idea. I haven't placed my own money into it yet, and anytime there's a parabolic move, that always kind of worries me.
Yeah.
But the growth is absolutely incredible that's going on right now, and so far it shows no sign of letting up. Just today it went up another $20 per Bitcoin, so it's an awesome show to watch for sure.
Well, that's true. I guess the good thing here is that it's a sign of the times, and it's a sign of the fact that people are clearly waking up to this whole fractional reserve lending system that is just no longer working, and everybody knows that these debt bubbles that you continue to inflate are eventually going to have a very big, loud pop and a bang. So people are starting to look to other ways to protect their money, themselves, and their families. Yeah, man, I want to thank you very much for taking some time to break it all down for us. This is a huge topic. I feel like we could probably talk about it for hours. But where can people maybe learn more from you or about some of the ideas that you are putting forth in regards to this?
Well, they can come see some of my articles on the Mises.ca website. Or they can come to my my company's website, which is www.mycfoweb.ca.
Perfect. All right, man. Thanks again for taking the time to talk with us, and you keep up the great work. Take care.
Thank you, Dan. You too.